We are now on part 5 of our Creating Passionate Readers series, diving deep into breaking free of novel-based pedagogy, which is kind of a scary title, I think, for some people, but you're going to walk away today feeling really confident. We're going to continue to focus on relevant and meaningful reading and learning experiences today. And thinking back to where we've built up to this point, we have identified 3 daily practices in our classrooms for the teacher who's really embracing the values of creating passionate readers. Students are reading at least 10 minutes a day during class, and they're expected to read at least 10 minutes at home for the minimum of 20 minutes total a day. During that reading time, teachers are conferring with at least 3 students during that reading time every single day, and students are writing daily journal entries centered on their independent reading choice to help them dive deeper into their reading. So what now, right? What can we do to meet the demands of our curriculum and our essential standards when every student is reading something different? We have our 3 daily practices. What do we do with the rest of our class time, right? So that's what our focus will be today. And this is going to take a mind shift. When I was starting out teaching, I asked myself this question: what book am I teaching this unit? In fact, when I first started teaching and I met with my mentor teacher, I was like, okay, so what do I teach? And they told me, okay, quarter 1, you're going to teach short stories, and quarter 2, you're going to do Of Mice and Men. Quarter 3, you're going to do Romeo and Juliet, and then quarter 4, To Kill a Mockingbird. And that was my introduction into teaching language arts. And we need to shift away from this because we don't teach novels. We need to ask ourselves, what skills do students need to master the unit? And we use literature and other texts as the vessels to help them master those skills. Again, we don't teach novels, we teach skills. And that's the embodiment of this practice we're going to learn about today. In the fall of 2019, in November, I got to hear Jared Amato speak. He is the founder of Project Lit, and he reminded me that students do not need to read insert any classic novel here or any book at all to become successful readers and writers, right? Your students are going to be successful whether or not they've read War and Peace or To Kill a Mockingbird or whatever it is that we hold near and dear to us. And we have to be comfortable with that. We have to be ready to move away from that mindset of teaching novels to teaching skills. So our objective is to kind of do a brief introduction into this concept of backward design in order for us to create authentic summative assessment based in standards. But let me clarify very quickly. When I say summative assessment, I don't mean a multiple choice test. When I say summative assessment, I really don't mean any kind of standardized tests. We want our students to be intrinsically motivated in our classrooms, so we want to design summative assessments that are authentic, relevant, and rigorous. But really, a summative assessment is just used to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional period. It's not the actual structure or content or design of the test that makes it summative, but the way it is used to determine whether or not students have learned the material that they have been taught. And they're evaluative, not diagnostic like formative assessment. It's more appropriately used to celebrate and evaluate learning achievement. So how do we start? We have to begin with the end in mind. This means moving away from lesson-based planning where you're asking yourself, okay, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, so we'll start with chapter 1 and we'll do this lesson and then we'll talk about this chapter. Okay, and now what am I doing tomorrow? If you're asking yourself all the time, what am I doing tomorrow? Then you're kind of stuck in the cycle of lesson-based planning. It might be still based in standards. In fact, when I was a first year teacher, sometimes I got lucky and my lesson that day happened to be aligned with Kansas standards, but there was no scope or sequence or really a clear goal that was transparent to students. And it wasn't even clear to me, the teacher, what direction we were heading. I was kind of just filling in the gaps as we went. But if we begin with the end in mind, we're doing more unit-based planning. We're moving towards an authentic application of learning. Teachers plan day-to-day lessons with that end in mind, and it gives you greater flexibility to personalize and adapt your teaching as you go. So if you plan how you're going to assess at the end first, you may not know what every lesson looks like, and you may not have everything fleshed out, but you at least have some skeleton of what students are going to accomplish, what skills they're going to master. So it's really just a simple 3-step process. First, we need to identify what students should know and be able to do by the end of the unit. This is where we're going to look at essential standards. The next step is where we actually design the summative assessment to measure that learning, and then you go back and plan your sequence of events. Usually it's flipped, right? You plan your lessons first, and then you determine how you're going to assess them later. So we want to make sure that it's not an afterthought, that we know and students know how they're going to be assessed and what they're going to learn before they learn it. So I'm going to share with you folks a link to a graphic organizer in the chat. I would love for you to treasure this or keep it somewhere safe. I use this all the time when I was planning and when I'm working with teachers on planning. It's a great tool to use to help you stick with the elements of backward design. So you're welcome to have that tab open as we continue to move forward. But really, it has a couple of components. It has where you can put the name of the unit and the dates and things like that. But usually this main section is what you want to focus on. There's a place to describe your summative assessment, but the first thing we do is look in this far left column, those essential standards. And that's where we're going to start today. And in order to determine what standards are essential, we have to look at our curriculum, right? Our curriculum for ELA is always available on the home page of our Canvas, and I'll make sure that you guys have that link available to you. But each of our curriculum documents, no matter what grade level or whether you're in honors or on level or IP or on level, they all have very similar structure, right? All these different components. But I find that overwhelming when I try to plan a summative assessment. So we're really going to just focus on 3 components of our curriculum document. The first is going to be the focus standards, but we're also going to look at the essential question and big ideas, and we're going to kind of forget everything else. And allow me to clarify, I think sometimes we confuse the focus questions with the standards, but we're just going to focus on those standards. And we're going to focus on those to determine what is essential and what is not essential. So in order to do this, let's think about our standards like a staircase. Our essential standards are what we're going to assess and summatively at the end of our unit. That puts them at the top of the staircase. However, there are other unessential standards that students need to be able to do and to practice in a low stakes environment to build the skill to get to that summative assessment. So all of these baby steps moving toward the top step, those are unessential. We're still teaching them. We're still having lessons centered based on those, but we're not assessing them at the end. We're practicing them as we move up the staircase. So here is an example of focus standards from the 8th grade Unit 4 curriculum document. And when I think about language arts in particular, and I'm thinking about summative essential standards, I want to think about what are students producing or creating with their learning. And so for me, I gravitate towards writing first. So I almost always look at the writing standards before I look at any other category, reading or speaking or listening. And so there are 2 focus standards here. The first says, write arguments to support claims with clear reasons and relevant evidence. The second says, write routinely over extended timeframes and shorter timeframes for a range of discipline-specific tasks, purposes, and audiences. So I'm going to break you out in just a second. I want you to be thinking of these 2, which one is essential, which one is our top of the staircase, and which one might be a lower step somewhere along the way. Determine kind of which one you think that is, and then we'll come back and share our thoughts in just a second. But really quick, let's hear from you guys. Which one did you determine to be the essential versus the unessential?
In our room?
Sure.
Sorry.
Awesome. That'd be great.
We thought that the first one, writing to the argument, was the more important standard.
Absolutely.
Or
You are spot on. Can anyone articulate as to why?
It's something that can actually be measured within one final assessment versus the other stuff is talking more about time, which is just kind of little check-ins, which is a more formative way of teaching anyways.
Absolutely, right? Students are going to create a draft and they're going to revise that draft and they're going to get more feedback and they're going to revise that draft and eventually they're going to turn in that final argument, right? But it's one of those baby steps leading up to that top step. Very good. Nice job, you guys. Let's go ahead and continue on. And there we go. Okay. So we've determined at this point that the writing arguments is our, our essential standard, while the over periods of time is more of our unessential. But formative, we're still doing it and we're still teaching it and students are still practicing that skill, but it's not what they're going to be assessed at the end of the unit. So in my graphic organizer, in that essential standards column, that's what I would put there. Now, normally I would continue on looking at my focus standards and seeing in my reading section and my speaking and listening section, what are some other essential standards? What are my other top steps that need to be included in the summative? But for now, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next steps, which are looking at our essential question and our big ideas in our curriculum documents. So again, we're in 8th grade language arts, unit 4. Our essential question and big ideas are listed here. And I kind of want to model my thinking for you as how I can bridge that essential standard of writing arguments to these other 2 components to create a summative. So the essential question asks, how can we adapt to change? So students are going to need to, maybe if they're writing arguments, they might need to argue for a specific change. But not just any change, it needs to help them better understand and impact the world around them, okay? That's something to keep in mind. As I move into the big ideas, they need to be analyzing 2 texts or more and determining the difference between fact and interpretation. So I'm thinking, do they need to be looking at some research? Do they need to be analyzing tone and bias in news sources? There must be a research component to this summative task. They also need to understand how audience and purpose can influence a writer and text. So this sounds like persuasion, right? They need to not only argue for a change based on some research, but they need to persuade others as well because they need to tailor it to a specific audience. And then the last big idea is that they present clearly and coherently. So there must be some kind of oral presentation involved within this whole concept. So how do I synthesize and triangulate these 3 things, that essential standard, the essential question, and these big ideas? Here's what I came up with. Students will identify an injustice in society, create a solution to that injustice, and develop a product that persuades others to act on their solution. Notice that writing a formal 5-paragraph essay is not necessarily included in this. They may be doing that at some point in this unit to kind of build their product, but maybe they're going to do a social media campaign or an infographic or a commercial. They're going to take their writing and make it into an authentic product. And then they're going to invite members of their community to view their solutions and listen to their appeals. So they're going to have to orally present to an authentic audience. And I think if I were doing this year, I would have people be zooming in, of course, right? So we can be, and that can happen, I think, in future years as well. So 3 questions I asked myself. The first, does this align with this essential standard we identified? Are students writing arguments? Yes, they are. Are they aligning with the essential question, that theme of changing and adapting and impacting our world? Absolutely. Does it align with the big ideas for the unit where they have to speak orally? There's going to be some research involved and they're going to have to analyze that tone and bias? Absolutely. There's going to be a lot of that involved in this process. So this is the summative task that I was able to come up with when I bridged those 3 components. And now you're ready to move on to this point into breaking down your essential standard into student-friendly I can statements. If they're going to write arguments, they have to be able to write a clear thesis. They have to write persuasive commentary. They have to use evidence to support that commentary, and they have to use feedback to improve their writing. And then once I've broken down that student-friendly language, I can start to think about how will students learn it. And this is where I'm going to pull out those lessons I have in my back pocket. Okay, I know I want them to write an outline for their essay. I'm probably going to have to do maybe like a flipped lecture on some writing instruction. They're going to do some peer edit workshops. They're going to confer with me along the way. And then I can think about supporting resources to get them there. If we're in the whole class novel mode, this is where the role of the whole class novel comes in. Again, we'll be talking about that more in another session, but because students are reading whatever they want at this point, I'm thinking more of like, I need to find some mentor texts of persuasive argumentative writing, letters, speeches, videos, infographics. What can students look to as an example of argumentative writing? So you may be thinking to yourself, but wait, this summative task and the lessons I plan leading up to it aren't related to the students' choice books. That's okay. Let me tell you why. Thinking back to that reading survey that students completed before we even dove into this work, back when they told us that reading was horrible and that they hated it and that they wish they could choose what they wanted to read and that they don't read at home, I also asked them how reading would be better. And I noticed a common trend. BV students say reading would be better if we didn't have to take tests about it, we didn't have reading guides to complete. This one made me laugh. There wasn't an art project to go with it. There weren't so many assignments. It wasn't about completing assignments. We didn't have to be tested. I had more time just to grab a book and free read. Could we just enjoy the books? I don't want it to be about completing assignments. So much homework with it, taking notes, analyzing everything. Over and over and over again, they feel the burden of assignments tied to their reading inhibits their reading. And in fact, we know that there's research that shows that the more assignments and burdens we place on tied to their choice reading, the less attractive reading becomes. Reading every day in order to build stamina, complexity, and reader identity is enough. It's enough. You're already holding them accountable with those daily reading conferences and those journal entries. They're going to be thinking deeply about the choice book they're reading, but they're going to be doing it on their own terms, at their own pace, without all of these extra burdens and requirements. So it is completely acceptable if the main objectives for your unit and those essential standards run parallel to your daily practices of reading, conferring, and writing journal entries. It's okay. Again, we don't teach novels, we teach skills. I think after the events of yesterday, and for those who are watching this recorded at a later time, I'm recording this on January 7th, the day after an insurrection took place at our Capitol. I think that is an example of how dire it is that students are taught critical reading and writing and thinking skills so that they are not misled by misinformation, right? Guys, our roles are so important as language arts teachers. We have to equip kids with the skills. It doesn't matter if they can tell you who said what in what chapter, or if they can tell you the theme of The Great Gatsby or symbolism in Huckleberry Finn. It doesn't matter. But can they write arguments? Can they persuade? Can they analyze bias and tone? Can they discern valid news sources? Can they speak clearly, write confidently? These are the skills that I want our kids to have for their future. And these are the skills that are going to carry them forward for the rest of their lives. All right, off the pedestal, off my little soapbox, but let's think ahead. Later this month, in 2 weeks, we're going to skip a week so that we can stay aligned with the high school late start on Silver Days now that we're transitioning back into hybrid. On January 28th, we are going to be talking about student-led book clubs. I'm really excited about this session. This is very different than maybe the traditional literature circle that many of us have done in years past. So I hope you tune in as well. On February 11th, we are going to be discussing how to merge the classics with independent reading. So guys, I know the classics are near and dear to me as well. We're going to talk about the role of the whole class novel with the creating passionate readers mindset, because there is a time and a place for a whole class novel. And on March 4th, we're going to be discussing how to build a community of readers. This is where we're going to really think and zoom out big. How can I continue to lay that foundation of a reader identity for my students? Please keep in mind that these dates are subject to change based on learning mode. We've already had a few date changes because of that, so just stay flexible and I'll do my best to communicate those changes. At this point, if you're wanting some more hands-on PL, if you want to sit down with me and use that graphic organizer to look at your upcoming quarter or your unit, I would be more than happy to do that. Shout out to those who have already worked with me in a lot of different buildings. I'm so impressed by what you guys are coming up with and how you are choosing to implement the values of creating passionate readers. I'm really impressed. But if you want to get started on that as well, reach out to me. I'm happy to meet in person or via Zoom. You can see my email there.